Now, let me just say off the bat that this video is talking about the greater societal trend of the male loneliness epidemic and what it may be leading to. The furthest thing from what I want out of this is to discard empathy and consideration of the individual. Obviously, young men taking their own lives out of feelings of isolation and desperation will never be a good thing. This video focuses mostly on theory and the greater societal trend, but I don't want to forget those who are suffering in isolation, as there is still change that can be made on the level of the individual and the social circle surrounding them that could help bring about an end to this problem. Anyways, in case you don't know what the male loneliness epidemic is, I'll give a basic summary. The male loneliness epidemic is a relatively recent trend of men reporting that they are facing extreme levels of loneliness in day-to-day life, mostly young men. Surveys have reported that, quote, 15% of men have no close friendship at all, a five-fold increase since 1990. There is a growing decrease in the size and intimacy of men's social circles. 65% of men aged 18 to 23 say that no one really knows me well. Men are unable to make meaningful and vulnerable connections with each other, and this leads to isolation and desperation. Instead, many of these men seek deep connection and a chance to be vulnerable through a romantic relationship. Vulnerability and honest communication are, of course, vital parts of any sort of close relationship, romantic or platonic. But for someone to have their sole emotional outlet and support be their significant other is unsustainable and dangerous. They risk losing their only outlet in the case of a breakup, and it just isn't fair or healthy to put all of that weight on a single person. So, in summary, the male loneliness epidemic revolves around the fact that a significant portion of men today have either no emotional support through other men or extremely fragile support systems that lead to feelings of extreme stratification. The effects of this social isolation are undeniable. The State of American Men reports that 40% of young men show depressive symptoms. 44% of all surveyed men had recently thought of suicide. A majority of young men have very little hope for the future, and men made up 80% of the suicides in 2022. This is theorized to be caused by a variety of factors: after effects of the pandemic, the commodified image of a perfect man that no one can meet, or even financial burdens and job insecurity that prevent paying for help. But I think the factor most true to the core of the issue is also the reason why it's a male epidemic to begin with: masculinity. When I say masculinity, I do not mean the very act of being born a man. Masculinity is the societally expected traits or attributes of a man. While partially rooted in natural human behavior and the effects of testosterone, masculinity is largely a social construct rather than an inherent behavioral pattern all men are born with. It is like a guideline on how a normative male should behave in order to neatly fit into society at large, and most men naturally will follow this. If you seek out the traits of masculinity, you will see aggressive, competitive, dominant, and stoic are among the top few results of any list. There is also an obsession with physical strength that can be used to facilitate the aforementioned desires. With just a surface-level glance at these, you may be able to see a bit of the inherent problem. None of these traits are socially desirable in any average conversation, and more importantly, they all run counter to the vulnerability that could make sincere connection easier. Men are bound to alienate others with aggression. That is kind of the whole function of aggression as a concept. The constant need for competition leaves men with their guards permanently up around each other. Men are encouraged to be dominant so competition cannot arise in a healthy form, and at the end of it, someone is left feeling lesser, like less of a man in the eyes of their peers in this half-imagined masculine society. The entire world seems like a masculine man's enemy, because according to their worldview and through the perceptions that have been shaped through a life adhering to it, it is. These traits are natively human to an extent, shared among men and women, and they're not inherently bad. There's nothing wrong with a bit of aggression and competition. That's the basis for ambition and can facilitate good-natured competition, like in sports. But modern masculinity encourages these asocial behaviors outside of moderation. The more aggressive, the more competitive, the more stoic, the more dominant, the manlier you are. The State of American Men says 40% of all men say they trust one or more men's rights, anti-feminist, or pro-violence voices from the manosphere. Nearly half of surveyed younger men say they trust such voices. These voices, like Andrew Tate, represent the least social aspects, encouraging further isolation into the wormhole of masculinity and actively promoting hate against those who are less of men or, God forbid, a woman. This rhetoric capitalizes on fragile egos, taking advantage of the lonely and making them feel like they have a place above others through the simple virtue of being a masculine man. When doing research for this video, I found a video from a Men First type channel that shocked the male loneliness epidemic as a feminist plot to undermine the power of men in larger society. Just about every single comment blames women for the ills of men and says no man actually feels lonely. They, of course, disregarded statistical evidence to have the phenomenon fit neatly into their misogynistic worldview. What these voices are doing is further isolating the masculine man from both women and other men, substituting a constructive vulnerability for a purely destructive hate. It does not take a long time to find examples of how alienating masculinity can be. I limit myself to 30 minutes of social media a day, and in that short amount of time, I see men being shamed in the comment sections for doing things outside of the masculine norm, such as wearing a small amount of makeup. Women making posts about feeling unsafe around men, such as a recent trend where they say they'd rather spend a night in the woods with a bear than a man, to which many men reply with things that would only serve to validate their decision. In the comments of posts from women who happen to have an OnlyFans, men are seen viciously mocking them for it, disparaging not only sex work but attacking the individual behind it. It is also reported that 6 in 10 men visit porn sites at least weekly. Men believe women must be pure, chaste, and virtuous, just not for them specifically. As discussed earlier, these masculine men suffering from isolation rely on their relationship with women almost entirely for emotional release, yet are also quick to objectify and reduce them. Surrounding lives are reduced to their function in the masculine competition, yet these same men wonder why they're feeling isolated and alone. This is not to say that masculinity is a doomed concept. There's no shame or wrongdoing in being a man that wants to provide for or protect those they care about. There is no problem in the quote-unquote masculine urge to build or create. If a man wants to cultivate muscles to please themselves or the male view, which is actually the group that the excess of muscles appeal to most, there's no harm in that. These are all forms of constructive and social masculinity, the kind that can make you friends, that isn't all-encompassing, and that's actually tangible. But even then, the cold stoicism of masculinity often shuts out other men, and a necessary vulnerability still runs counter to masculinity's defining traits. So how could the male loneliness epidemic be a good thing? Well, it can be a catalyst for change, the first step of the social evolution. Men have been stagnant in patriarchal power systems for hundreds of years, and masculinity hasn't had the need to evolve by its own merit. Through centuries, masculinity has been defined by their aggressive, competitive, and physical strength. Joseph H. Peck asserts that there are 5 periods of masculinity in which American masculinity developed. First is the agrarian patriarchal period from roughly 1630 to 1820, where only men could do much of anything, and posited masculinity is only for the white male. Women and children were discounted. Slaves could not be masculine as they were not seen as men. Only, quote, aggressive and competitive members of the male sex were masculine. Next is the commercial period from 1820 to 1860, where it was cemented that men should be the ones to face the competition of business and public affairs, while women stayed home and at church. In the strenuous life period from 1861 to 1919, masculinity became inextricably tied with physical strength, as women began to enter the workforce and men needed to keep them out with the justification of a difference in strength. In this period, Clyde W. Franklin II says better than I ever could, "One thing appears certain, and that is that the meaning of being masculine shifted from being the opposite of childish to being the opposite of feminine." It was during this period that some men became labeled as effeminate, specifically by those in occupations that had been invaded by women. It is safe to say then that not only is a societal definition of femininity formed during the strenuous life period, but also a societal devaluation of femininity begins, the remnants of which remain today. The companionate providing period from 1920 to 1965 brought forth the idea that a masculine man was a provider, and thus this became a staple of masculinity. This, of course, brought along an uptick in the competitive and aggressive nature behind masculinity. After all, a true man now needed to get ahead. The final period is post-1965, which is still ongoing technically, although it would not be difficult to break it up even further outside of Pleck's outline. As we can see throughout all these periods, the masculine traits never really changed all that much. The predominant ones just continued to get heightened. The strenuous life and companionate providing periods seem to be the primary sources for the alienation that's inherent in modern masculinity. During the 1970s, in the face of the women's rights movement, masculinity became clearly defined in a way that has not truly been broken from, doubling down on its extremes, while femininity has continued to actively evolve in different directions. Even as recently as the 1950s, the ideal traits of femininity were quiet, delicate, sweet, graceful, submissive, and/or nurturing. They were not allowed the right of ambition. Now, common feminine characteristics include strong, independent, and ambitious. There's been a reclamation in femininity that has turned it from something that is devalued and looked down upon into a broader and more widely encompassing identity to be proud of. Masculinity, on the other hand, has become more of a tight and confined identity. Men stopped wearing expressive clothes during the 1980s AIDS epidemic out of fear of being mistaken for a homosexual, a standard that still largely persists. Calling a man gay is still a common insult for showing too much emotion or vulnerability. Men are afraid to be physically or emotionally intimate with each other, as that is also worthy of the damnation of gay. Masculinity was defined out of opposition of those men saw themselves as above, namely women, gays, slaves. Men are not to be compassionate or delicate or vulnerable because that admits a flaw in the system of oppression that we have fallen too deep into. Men need to change how they behave, or else they are going to stay lonely. Fathers teach their children how to be masculine, and these lonely people won't be having kids, meaning they will not be able to pass their concept of masculinity down. Ironically, it's a situation that's not dissimilar to a social survival of the fittest, a concept that masculine men love to tout as justification and validation for their asocial behaviors. Perhaps the comforts of everyday life no longer necessitate these extremes, or social understanding has grown to see the artificiality behind it. Regardless, masculinity as it exists is not sustainable or reproductive, so what can be done? There is no quick and easy solution. Perhaps social evolution will slowly kill the undesirable masculine traits over decades of selection, but that will likely not be in our lifetime. Fathers or other male role models can teach their children more healthy forms of masculinity, then just have to hope that social interaction in school doesn't undo that work. For men, to be vulnerable is to be unmanly, and in the constant state of masculine competition, vulnerability can and will be used against you. Many men will reject the idea of vulnerability and empathy altogether. After all, it is difficult. Those unwilling to change, however, may just stay lonely. Another one of the most prominent masculine traits on the top of those lists is bravery, or courage. I don't think this one is truly all that common in day-to-day life. If anything, strictly adhering to masculine standards out of a fear of alienation seems quite cowardly. Real bravery would come in the form of being vulnerable and open, rejecting the systems forced onto you by your very nature of being. Maybe the boys reject you and you get ostracized, but then you have a new opportunity. An opportunity to make new, sincere friendships. Some that won't be as shallow or lonely. Hello, I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least it got something out of it. I've had this one rattling around in my head for quite a while now, so it feels nice to finally get out there. All of the sources I've used will be in the description, and if you did enjoy, do consider subscribing. I'll be hopefully making many more video essays in the future, and many of them probably will not be as serious about this, more about media and analysis of it. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a good day. Goodbye.